Diary of Dr. X, Episode 5, 2 Years in Hell. Before my current bout of unemployment, I spent 2 years in hell, working at a local bread plant. Just like my study of the street economy, I also treated it as a participant observation study, though in this case of working conditions, labor relations, and the economic and ecological efficiencies involved in the production process at this facility. I can't name them, or I could be sued. You see, employees have to sign a waiver when hired not to publicly discuss the company's internal operations. This is a policy which is common, I have learned, throughout all food processing facilities, and for good reason. The plant in question belonged to one of the biggest CCCP food retailers in North America, with stores operating under a variety of brand names throughout Canada and the United States. During my time working there, the company proudly informed its employees that a recent Globe and Mail survey, that's one of our national newspapers, had recently rated them as one of the top 50 places to work in Canada. Clearly, whoever put together that little survey had never visited my workplace, which was anything but a bakery. Edible products manufacturing facility would be more appropriate, or just hell. Appropriately to that metaphor, the temperature pushed 100 degrees Celsius in the summer, or Fahrenheit rather, in the summer. The company was too cheap to pay for air conditioning. During my tenure there, though, the management was so proud to install exhaust fans. These made absolutely no difference, of course, when it was 30 degrees Celsius outside, since it was just as hot inside. The working conditions in general were atrocious. Outside of the operators, the people who ran the machines, everyone else was involved in constant repetitive lifting throughout the day. Whether they were loading or stacking pans, loading the racks with product, or at the wrappers, everyone was forced to keep pace with the machinery they served, which left them no time for thought or error. This is typical of CCC production facilities. They reduce the workers to servants of machinery, just as E.F. Schumacher, my hero, once pointed out. Pretty much everyone also suffered from repetitive stress disorder, also known as tennis elbow, in their elbows from the constant lifting as a consequence, including those who worked in shipping. Several also had chronic back problems. The entire process of production was broken down into bits, following the usual assembly line logic of the capitalist machine. First, there was the scaler, who weighed out the dry ingredients, including various chemical softeners and preservatives not even my doctorate allowed me to comprehend. These were necessary, too, since the bread we manufactured didn't arrive in the stores for at least 2 to 3 days after it was produced. Our bread also wasn't shipped direct to the stores, but first to their distribution center. There it was unloaded and put on trucks with everything else which was going to their various stores. This was considered somehow more efficient than sending it directly to the stores. So that's, for some reason, I have never been able to comprehend. About half of what we produced was also shipped 24 hours to their other distribution center in Calgary, Alberta, while they shipped roughly the same amount in our direction of varieties that we didn't produce. All of which means that the bread arriving in the stores was 2 to 3 days old at a minimum. Following the scaler was the mixer. He was the next operator. They added the wet ingredients, such as liquid sugar and canola oil, as well as the flour with an injection system to create doughs large enough to produce 500 to 1,000 loaves each. That's a lot of bread. These were cut into appropriate sizes by the divider, the third operator down the line, then rolled and shaped by machinery, not by hand, before being dropped into various size pans, loaded onto racks by us grunts, and pushed into the proofer. The proofer used heat and humidity to accelerate the rise of the dough. When ready, it then got loaded into the oven at the rate of roughly 50 loaves every 2 minutes. That's a lot of bread too. After baking, the product was basically rode around on the cooling conveyor, which was up near the ceiling, for about an hour before coming down to the wrappers. This conveyor never got properly cleaned the entire time I worked there, almost 2 years. Same with the pans. They never got cleaned either. Just got sterilized in the oven every time they went through. And of course, both the pans and the conveyor may make direct contact with the product, which is what you people eat. Nice, eh? Anyways, at the wrapper, the product was put into bags with fasteners, which are called quick locks, in case you didn't know what they're called. They're the ones with the little best before dates on them. And these dates, the best before dates, were routinely changed before shipping to meet the necessary numbers for the day. Sometimes you'd have a little extra bread, needed to make up a shortfall the following day. Well, you just change the numbers, so now it's 3 or 4 days before it reaches the store. The thing I found fascinating, though, and this is typical throughout CCC production facilities, the thing I found fascinating was the way that 4 or 5 hour runs of hot dog and hamburger buns often went into over half a dozen different wrappers belonging to at least 3 different companies, not just ours. All exactly the same product and recipe. There was no stop in the production process. It was just one batch after another, after another, after another. But they were all priced differently, and they were all sold under different names in different stores. People think they have a selection when they go to the supermarket. That's not the case. In general, you have a selection of brand names, not of manufacturers or of products, if this facility is any example. We produced hot dog and hamburger buns for half of Western Canada, and they were all exactly the same recipe, exactly the same product. Same was true of their standard bread brand name, since they manufactured bread under as many names as they had supermarket chains. It was interchangeable with the bread of their so-called competitors, since we often made up their shortfalls when they couldn't meet their orders. As with the buns, all they did was change wrappers, not recipes. It was all exactly the same product coming off the line. They would just pause for a moment, put on a new wrapper, same bread, different company, different name, different price. My own back problems were my ticket out, thankfully. You see, the plant manager was an Argentinian, only recently hired, and during my tenure there, not one supervisor was hired by him who was Canadian. The rest were from China, the former Soviet Union, or various other third world countries. Needless to say, labor relations in such places are not what we are accustomed to here in Canada. This was fortunate for me, actually, when my own back finally went out from chronic strain due to almost a year in a row of loading the oven, mostly on the bun shift. This is the only position that has to lift each and every pan that goes through the system. In any other position but pan stacker, when they're empty, that's when they're coming out of the oven, this responsibility is shared. And why were my back problems fortunate? Because as soon as management got wind of my workers' compensation board claim the first time I was injured, which stated that I could apply for compensation on an open-ended basis, anytime I had further problems, they began harassing me out of my job. This was easy, you see. I was working the night shift and relied on public transit to get to and from work. So they began scheduling me when there was no public transit available, on purpose. Never been a problem scheduling me around the bus for almost 2 years that I worked there, and then suddenly, their mouthpiece said, the supervisor on duty, "The company is not responsible for whether you can get home or not." So, I dutifully recorded all these incidents of harassment for about a month, while walking home an hour and a half in the November cold most nights, before talking to, finally, my union representative. They told me that I had a good case for harassment and would probably win in arbitration and keep my job despite the company's attempts to force me out. But, they asked, the question is whether you really want to keep your job. Well, no, not really, I said. We'd already discussed the fact that I had a PhD PhD. So a couple of faxes and phone calls were made while I sat in their office, and a few minutes later, they had arranged for what is known as a mutually agreed separation. This is akin to a divorce, but without all the squabbling over property and kids. What it means on paper is that you both agree to cease working together. In more practical terms, I wasn't fired, and I didn't quit. And so I was eligible for employment insurance benefits. My research had also discovered that lack of transportation was a legitimate reason for voluntarily leaving one's employment, according to Service Canada, who pay out the employment insurance benefits. And you can, of course, still retain your benefits. And now, even better, I had my union representative as a witness in that regard. Well, I still shop at this CCCP supermarket chain because, unfortunately, it's the only one in the Osborne Village area. And I have no vehicle because I'm an ecologist. But believe me, I will never buy their bread again.